if you're always the first to reply, if your phone lights up and you answer instantly, if you rearrange your schedule so others won't feel neglected, then this video is for you. And if that doesn't sound like you, then maybe it should. Because in a world obsessed with attention, the one who offers it too freely is the one most often ignored. Today, we're going to uncover a paradox that few dare to confront. The more available you are, the less power you hold. Let that sink in. You were taught that responsiveness is a virtue, that being dependable, reachable, constantly present would earn you appreciation. But what if that's a lie? What if your constant availability has nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with fear? Fear of disappointing, fear of losing connection, fear of being seen as cold, distant, or difficult. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you bend to be available, the more others take you for granted. They start to expect you, not appreciate you. And once expectation replaces gratitude, you become invisible, no matter how present you are. You weren't being generous, you were being consumed. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago, those who seek to please everyone lose the leverage to lead anyone. Think about the last time someone ignored your message, not for hours, but for days. Yet when they finally replied, you didn't feel anger. You felt curiosity. You wondered what made them so unavailable. You wondered if you had said something wrong. And in that moment, they had power, not because they were better, but because they were absent. You see, humans don't respect what's always accessible. They respect what feels earned, what feels scarce, what demands a certain effort to reach. That's why royalty sits on a throne, elevated. That's why luxury is expensive. That's why silence draws more attention than noise. It's not about arrogance, it's about perceived value. The more accessible you are, the more people assume you need them. And that assumption destroys your leverage. When you're always available, you send a message, not with words, but with behavior. You say, "Your time is more important than mine. Interrupt me anytime, I'll adjust. I'll sacrifice my peace so you don't feel discomfort, but they don't thank you for it. They just come to expect it." Expectations never breed respect, they breed entitlement. Machiavelli wasn't cruel when he said, "It is better to be feared than loved." He was being realistic, because love can fade. Fear commands presence. Availability kills both. The tragedy is this. You thought being available made you loyal, valuable, someone people could count on. But in reality, it made you forgettable. And worse, it made you replaceable. Because when you always show up, people stop noticing you. They stop wondering where you are. They stop questioning your silence. Eventually, they stop respecting your presence. Not because you did something wrong, but because you were too easy to reach. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He didn't write for the moral, he wrote for the powerful. And in his world and ours, power isn't earned by goodness. It's preserved through perception. He warned against being too generous, too forgiving, too accessible. Not because these traits are evil, but because they're easily manipulated. "A prince who is too kind," he wrote, "will be devoured by those who mistake kindness for weakness." And that's exactly what's happening to you. Your availability is mistaken for lack of purpose. Your presence for desperation. Your kindness for submission. But here's the real question. When did your time become less valuable than theirs? When did your urgency become optional? When did your attention become the default setting? The more you train people to expect you, the less they will chase you. And nothing kills desire, respect, or influence like being taken for granted. Availability is not love. It's a currency, and you've been spending it like it's infinite. But here's the truth. The less available you are, the more gravity your presence carries. Because in silence, mystery is born. And in mystery, power lives. Scarcity changes everything. The moment you withdraw, even slightly, people begin to notice. They feel the void. They ask where you went, why you're quiet, if they've done something wrong. But they didn't care when you were there, only when you left. That's the paradox. It's not your words they respect. It's your absence. It's not your availability they value. It's your unwillingness to give it easily. And when you stop being omnipresent, you become something rare. And rarity always commands attention. Machiavelli would call this strategic silence. He understood the power of mystery. The moment you speak too often, you lose your edge. The moment you're always seen, you're no longer observed. The moment you explain, you surrender control. You think your availability makes you relatable, but it actually dissolves your presence into background noise. And people don't remember the background. They remember the one who left the room, without warning. They remember the one who wasn't at the party, the one who didn't respond, the one who said nothing, and somehow made the loudest impact. Silence is not weakness. It's tension. And tension is power, because people fill silence with their own insecurities. They wonder, they speculate, they create entire narratives around your absence. And you control all of it without saying a word. The most dominant person in any room is rarely the loudest. It's the one who speaks least, moves least, but whose silence forces others to orbit around them. That's the difference between participation and presence. One blends you in, the other elevates you above. But let's ask a harder question. Why were you always available in the first place? Was it because they needed you, or because you needed to be needed? This is the wound no one wants to touch, because constant availability often comes from fear. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of being replaced, the fear that if you're not always present, you'll somehow stop mattering. So you overcompensate. You answer immediately. You say yes before you think. You cancel your priorities for theirs. And each time you do, you shrink. They don't see your sacrifice. They just see someone who's always there. And when someone is always there, they become part of the scenery. Unnoticed, unquestioned, unappreciated. Machiavelli warned that the illusion of loyalty is often more dangerous than betrayal, because it traps you in the service of those who would never do the same for you. But the shift happens the moment you realize that your time is currency, that every reply costs you energy, that every yes comes at the price of something you didn't choose. And the more you give it away, the more bankrupt you become, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Here's the truth. You don't owe everyone your presence. Your attention is not an obligation. Your silence is not rudeness. Your delay is not disrespect. It's choice, and choice is power. Because when you start saying no, when you stop answering right away, when you begin to pause and consider whether the interruption deserves your energy, something strange happens. They start treating you differently. Suddenly, your presence feels meaningful. Your words carry more weight. Your time is respected. Because now it's no longer assumed. You've shifted from a passive participant to a selective force, from a servant of expectation to an architect of boundaries. And here's where it gets even more interesting. You begin to feel peace. Not the peace that comes from acceptance, but the peace that comes from sovereignty. You're no longer at the mercy of everyone else's urgency. You've reclaimed something sacred, your time, your pace, your voice. But let's be clear about something. Silence is not rejection. It's not bitterness. It's not a sign that you've given up on people. It's a sign that you've stopped chasing noise. Because in this world, silence is a rare luxury, and what's rare commands power. Most people misunderstand silence. They think you're distant, aloof, maybe even cold. But here's the truth. Silence isn't coldness. It's clarity. It means you've stopped filling your schedule just to avoid your thoughts. It means you no longer equate constant connection with emotional safety. It means your attention is no longer for sale to the highest bidder of urgency. Machiavelli didn't advocate for chaos. He advocated for control. And sometimes the greatest control comes not from action, but from the refusal to react. The person who stays silent in chaos is not confused. They're calculating. The person who doesn't explain themselves isn't weak. They've already decided they don't need your understanding to validate their truth. Explanations are often just apologies in disguise, apologies for taking up space, apologies for not being who others wanted you to be. But you don't need to explain your silence. You don't need to justify your distance. Your absence doesn't require permission. It only requires intent. That's the difference between withdrawal and strategy. Withdrawal is retreat. Strategy is recalibration. When you choose to step back, not because you're wounded, but because you're watching, you enter a new psychological dimension. You become unpredictable. And unpredictability is leverage. Because in a world where everyone is oversharing, your silence becomes a fortress, a place where your thoughts are not on display, where your emotions are not up for debate, where your power is not diluted by the reactions of others. This doesn't mean you become absent from life. It means you choose where to appear. You control the stage. You control the timing. You control the spotlight. And those who control when and how they appear are never forgotten. They are not ghosts. They are not loners. They are architects. They are players who understood the game and decided to stop being pieces. They stopped shouting for attention and started commanding it with silence. Look closely at how the world works. Who sets the pace? Who controls the timing? Who decides when things begin and when they end? It's not the most available person in the room. It's not the one who replies instantly. It's not the one constantly present, endlessly polite, eternally ready. Number. It's the one who makes others wait, the one who chooses their moments, the one who understands that timing is not just etiquette, it's dominance. When you control when you show up, you control the emotional temperature. You set the tone. You decide what matters and when it matters. This is not manipulation. It's architecture, because social life isn't chaos. It's choreography. A series of rituals, responses, and routines, most of which are designed to reward the visible, but secretly obey the invisible. Think about it. Who are the people others listen to in a meeting? The ones who interrupt constantly, or the one who says nothing until the room is silent, then speaks with precision? Who leads in a relationship? The person who over-explains, or the one who sets quiet, unwavering boundaries with just their absence? Who gets remembered, the always available, or the one who left something unsaid. This isn't about playing games, it's about breaking them, because the system teaches you to comply, to be fast, responsive, connected. It tells you that silence means failure, that delay means disrespect, that being unavailable means being left behind. But here's the truth. That's how they keep you dependent. If you're always plugged in, you're always reachable. If you're always reachable, you're always reactive. And if you're always reactive, you're never in control. They want you busy, not powerful. They want you scrolling, not thinking. They want you emotionally accessible, so your boundaries stay unlocked. But when you disconnect, strategically, intentionally, you shatter their rhythm. You break their loop. You force them to notice what they once assumed was permanent. That is how systems are challenged, not with noise, with withdrawal. And in that space, the space where you say nothing, everything shifts, because now you're no longer responding to the world. The world is responding to you. The greatest myth in social life is this, that those who speak the most lead the most, that those who are loudest are the most influential. But history tells a different story. The most magnetic people aren't chasing attention. They're commanding it, often without saying a word. They walk into a room and shift its energy, not because they demand space, but because they occupy it differently. You've seen them. The person who doesn't interrupt, yet everyone waits for their opinion. The one who rarely posts, yet when they do, everyone pays attention. The one whose presence says more than your explanations ever could. They aren't desperate to be seen. They are seen precisely because they aren't desperate. This is the power of stillness. This is the art of making your silence louder than someone else's noise. And this is where many misunderstand power. They think it's about aggression, charisma, domination. But often, real power is quiet, subtle, unapologetic. Because true power doesn't beg, it doesn't plead, it doesn't explain. It chooses, it selects when to appear, it withholds without guilt. It doesn't answer every message, not out of disrespect, but out of self-respect. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said, "A wise man does at once what a fool does at last." The wise don't rush to respond. They don't fight for approval. They observe. They withhold. And when they act, they do so with impact. This is why people follow them. Not because they speak the loudest, but because they say the least and mean every word of it. They are hard to read, but impossible to forget. They are not easily available, but deeply felt when they appear. And here's the brutal irony. The less you care about being followed, the more people will follow. Because in a world full of performance, authentic restraint is magnetic. You don't need to chase respect. You need to become someone whose presence demands it. So stop explaining. Stop overshowing. Stop trying to earn the approval of people who only notice you when you disappear. Be still. Be deliberate. Be rare. Because the rarest things don't ask for attention. They become the reason people look up. When you stop racing to be everywhere, you begin to notice something strange. The people who once ignored you pause longer when you speak. The ones who took you for granted start measuring your presence more carefully. The invitations you used to chase begin to arrive without effort, not because they've changed, but because you have. You've recalibrated the signal. You're no longer broadcasting noise. You're transmitting rarity. And rarity has gravity. People orbit what they cannot easily access. not because of status, not because of arrogance, but because human nature is drawn to what withholds itself intentionally. You've become less predictable, and in a world addicted to patterns, the unpredictable become powerful. Because when you no longer show up everywhere, people start to wonder where you are. And that wondering is the beginning of attention. Real attention, not algorithmic, not reactive, but rooted in mystery, value, and respect. This is how you stop being background. This is how you stop being replaceable, not by being louder, but by being more precise, more intentional, more deliberate with your presence. You've stopped giving them your time. Now they want your time. You've stopped explaining yourself. Now they crave your clarity. You've become what Machiavelli would call a strategic presence, not passive, not distant, but disciplined. Because power is not about force, it's about rhythm. And the person who controls rhythm controls perception. You show up less so they listen more. You speak less so they remember longer. You appear on your own time so they adjust to your timing. This isn't withdrawal, it's authorship. You're no longer being written by the expectations of others. You are writing the narrative. On your terms, at your pace. Because you've finally realized the most powerful person in the room isn't the one who says, "I'm here for you." It's the one who doesn't need to say anything at all. But now comes the hard part. Because once you taste this kind of power, once you feel the stillness, the clarity, the self-possession that comes from not being constantly available, you can't go back. You can't pretend to enjoy trivial conversations. You can't force enthusiasm for places you don't want to be. You can't fake urgency for someone else's convenience. You've stepped out of the pattern. You've seen the gears turning. You've realized how often you were used, not because people are cruel, but because you made yourself useful before you made yourself valuable. And now that script is broken. This is the point of no return. It's liberating, but it's not easy. Because freedom doesn't come with comfort. It comes with confrontation. You'll lose people. You'll unsettle others. Some will call you distant. Some will say you've changed. And they'll be right. You've changed. Because the old you was addicted to being needed. The old you thought love meant availability. The old you was afraid of missing out. But the new you doesn't chase, doesn't explain, doesn't apologize for being selective with energy, for valuing peace over participation, for choosing solitude over superficial access. And in this silence, you begin to build. Not just boundaries, but identity. Not just distance, but depth. Not just absence, but power. Because power isn't about being seen. It's about being remembered when you're not around. And now the choice is yours. You can go back. You can make yourself available again. You can lower your boundaries, reply faster, try harder, chase louder. Or you can step forward. You can embrace the discomfort of being different. You can endure the misunderstanding that comes with being sovereign. You can let your silence speak louder than anything you've ever said before. Because the truth is this: you were never too cold. You were just too accessible. You were never ignored. You were just too present. You were never weak. You just never paused long enough for people to notice your strength. Now they will, not because you raised your voice, but because you took it away. And in that silence, they finally heard you.